The dust kicked up around Clara Bennett's worn boots as she pushed open the door to Henderson's general store, her stomach tight with hunger and her coin purse heavy enough to buy the flour and beans she desperately needed. She had ridden 3 hours from her small homestead outside Silver Ridge, Arizona Territory, in the sweltering July heat of 1882, and the thought of cool water and supplies had kept her going through every miserable mile. The bell above the door chimed, and the conversations inside died like a candle snuffed out. Clara felt the weight of every pair of eyes in the store turned toward her, taking in her dark brown skin, her simple calico dress, and the determined set of her jaw. She had expected this. She always expected this. But necessity drove her forward, and she walked to the counter where Mr. Henderson stood with his arms crossed, his weathered face settling into hard lines. "We don't serve your kind here," Henderson said flatly, his voice carrying through the silent store. "You best move along." Clara's fingers tightened around the coins in her pocket. "I have money, good money, I just need flour, beans, and some salt. Did you hear me, girl?" Henderson's voice rose, and several men near the back of the store shifted closer, their faces twisted with the same ugly prejudice. "Get out of my store before I have you thrown out." The shame burned hot in Clara's chest, mixing with anger and frustration, but she had learned long ago that fighting this battle head-on would only bring trouble. She turned slowly, her spine straight despite the humiliation coursing through her, and walked back toward the door. The July sun blasted her face as she stepped outside, and she stood on the wooden sidewalk for a moment, trying to decide what to do next. The next town was a full day's ride away, and her supplies were running dangerously low. That was disgraceful. The voice came from her left, deep and steady, with an edge of barely contained anger that was not directed at her. Clara turned to see a tall cowboy leaning against the post outside the store, his hat tipped low over his face. He straightened now, and she could see he was younger than his weathered appearance suggested, maybe 25 or 26, with sun-bronzed skin, dark hair that touched his collar, and blue eyes that held something she rarely saw when white folks looked at her. Genuine outrage on her behalf. "Happens all the time," Clara said quietly, not wanting to draw more attention than she already had. She started to move past him toward where she had tied her horse, but he stepped into her path, not threateningly but with purpose. "That doesn't make it right," he said. "Name's Jake Sullivan. I've been out on the range for 3 months, just got back into town this morning, and that's the first thing I see. Henderson treating a paying customer like dirt because of the color of her skin." He shook his head, his jaw tight. "I've got half a mind to go in there and tell him exactly what I think." "Please don't," Clara said quickly. "It'll only make things worse. I'll ride to the next town." Jake studied her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. "What's your name?" She hesitated, then decided there was no harm in it. "Clara Bennett. Miss Bennett, would you mind waiting here for about 20 minutes? I need to conduct some business, and then I'd like to talk to you if you're willing." Clara did not know what to make of this stranger, but something in his eyes made her trust him, at least enough to wait. "All right." Jake tipped his hat to her and strode into the general store with the confidence of a man who knew exactly what he wanted. Clara moved to the shade of the overhang and waited, her curiosity growing with each passing minute. Through the window, she could see Jake talking to Henderson, their conversation growing more animated. Henderson's face turned red, and he shook his head vigorously several times, but Jake kept talking, his posture relaxed but immovable. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jake emerged from the store, followed by a tight-lipped Henderson and another man Clara recognized as the town lawyer, Samuel Pritchard. The 3 men stood in a cluster on the sidewalk, papers were produced, and Jake pulled out a leather wallet thick with bills. Clara's eyes widened as she watched money change hands, documents get signed on a barrel that Henderson dragged outside, and the lawyer nodding officiously. When the transaction was complete, Henderson looked like he had swallowed something bitter. He stomped off down the street without a backward glance, and the lawyer scurried away with his papers and his fee. Jake turned to Clara with a slight smile on his face. "Miss Bennett, would you like to come inside? The store is under new management as of about 5 minutes ago." Clara stared at him. "You didn't." "I did." Jake's smile widened. "Henderson's been wanting to retire for a while now. His rheumatism has been bothering him, and his wife wants to move to California to be near their daughter. I made him an offer he couldn't refuse, cash on the barrel, as they say. The store is mine now. You bought a store because he wouldn't serve me." Clara's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "I bought a store because I've been looking for a way to settle down instead of riding the range every season, and because I've got money saved up from 10 years of driving cattle and not much to spend it on," Jake said, his tone matter-of-fact. But the timing was motivated by watching a good woman get treated shamefully. "Now, please, come inside and get what you need. No charge for today." "I can pay," Clara said quickly, her pride stinging. "I know you can. But today, after what happened, I'd consider it a personal favor if you'd let me make this right." Jake held the door open, waiting. Clara walked into the store on shaking legs. The few customers who remained inside stared openly as Jake went behind the counter and started pulling down the items she had requested. He moved with surprising efficiency for someone who had owned the place for less than 10 minutes, measuring out flour and beans into paper sacks, wrapping the salt in brown paper. "I'm going to need help running this place," Jake said conversationally as he worked. "I know cattle and horses, but I don't know much about running a store. You wouldn't happen to be looking for work, would you, Miss Bennett?" Clara's heart jumped into her throat. "You're offering me a job." "I'm offering you a job as store manager," Jake corrected. "I can handle the heavy lifting and ordering, but I need someone who knows how to deal with customers, keep the books, and manage inventory. From the way you walked in here earlier, head high despite everything, I'd say you've got more backbone than half the people in this town." "That's exactly what I need." "The town won't like it," Clara warned, though hope was beginning to bloom in her chest like a desert flower after rain. "The town can learn to live with it," Jake said firmly. "So what do you say? The pay is fair and you can start tomorrow if you want." "We'll get the details worked out as we go." Clara looked at this stranger who had just upended his life and spent what must have been a considerable fortune to right a wrong done to her, and she made a decision that would change everything. Yes, I'll take the job." Jake's smile was like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. "Excellent. Now let's get you loaded up with these supplies, and I'll see you tomorrow morning, say around 7. As Clara rode back to her homestead that evening, her saddlebags full of supplies and her mind reeling with the day's events, she could not stop thinking about Jake Sullivan and his startling blue eyes. She had learned not to trust easily, especially not white men who seemed too good to be true, but something about Jake felt different. Genuine. She would have to wait and see if that impression held true. True to his word, Jake was waiting outside the store when Clara arrived the next morning, the eastern sky just beginning to lighten with the promise of another scorching day. He had already swept the front sidewalk and propped open the door to let in the cool morning air before the heat settled in like a heavy blanket. "Morning, Miss Bennett," he greeted her cheerfully. "Ready for your first day?" "Ready as I'll ever be," Clara replied, tying her horse to the post. She had worn her best dress, a deep blue cotton that her mother had made for her before she passed, and she had braided her hair in a neat crown around her head. Jake showed her around the store, explaining Henderson's system for inventory, which was haphazard at best. Supplies were stocked with no apparent logic, the books were a mess of crossed-out numbers and unclear entries, and the back room was a disaster of half-opened crates and jumbled merchandise. "I can see why Henderson wanted to retire," Clara murmured, surveying the chaos. "This is going to take some serious work to sort out." "That's why I hired the best," Jake said, and there was no mockery in his tone, only confidence in his decision. They worked side by side all morning, Clara making lists and reorganizing while Jake hauled crates and took direction with good humor. When the first customers arrived around 9 o'clock, the atmosphere in the store changed immediately. Mrs. Greenwood, the banker's wife, took one look at Clara behind the counter and turned on her heel without a word. Mr. Patterson, who owned the livery stable, stared hard at both of them but grudgingly made his purchase, though he addressed all his comments to Jake and ignored Clara completely. By noon, Clara's stomach was in knots. "This isn't going to work," she said quietly when they were alone. "People are either leaving without buying anything or acting like I'm invisible. You're going to lose business." Jake was stacking canned goods on a shelf and he paused to look at her. "Clara, may I call you Clara? Miss Bennett seems too formal if we're going to be working together every day." "You may," she said, surprised by the familiarity but not opposed to it. "Clara, I didn't buy this store expecting it to be easy. I bought it because it was time for me to put down roots somewhere, and I bought it when I did because watching you get treated that way made my blood boil. My father raised me to judge a person by their character, not their appearance. Some of these folks might need time to adjust, and some of them might never come around, but I'm betting that most people in this town need supplies more than they need to hold onto their prejudices. We'll give it time. And what if they decide to drive you out of business?" Clara asked, voicing the fear that had been growing all morning. Jake stepped closer, and Clara caught the scent of soap and leather, clean and masculine. "Then we'll deal with that when it happens, but I don't give up easy, Clara, and I don't think you do either. Let's make a pact right here. We give this 6 months. If it's truly not working by then, we'll reassess. But I think you're going to surprise yourself with how strong you are, and this town is going to surprise itself with how much it can change. Deal?" Clara looked into those steady blue eyes and felt something shift inside her chest, something warm and unfamiliar and a little bit frightening. Deal. As the days turned into weeks, a routine developed. Clara arrived at dawn and she and Jake would prepare the store for the day ahead. She reorganized the entire inventory system, creating a logical flow that made it easy for customers to find what they needed. She scrubbed the floors and windows until they shone, and she created beautiful displays of merchandise that caught the eye. Jake handled the heavy work, the ordering, and the difficult customers who refused to speak to Clara. But he always made sure they knew that Clara was the manager and that her word was law in the store. Slowly, painfully slowly, some of the town began to come around. Mrs. Chen, who ran the laundry, was the first. She came in one afternoon looking for thread and struck up a conversation with Clara about the best techniques for removing stubborn stains. By the time she left, she had invited Clara to tea, an invitation that shocked them both. Then came the Reverend Blackwell, a progressive-minded minister who had been outspoken about the need for Christian charity and equality. He made a point of shopping at the store and addressing Clara respectfully, even going so far as to shake her hand in public, which caused quite a stir. A few of his congregation followed his lead, tentatively at first but with growing ease. But for every small victory, there were setbacks. Someone painted a vile slur on the front of the store one night, and Jake spent 2 hours scrubbing it off before Clara arrived the next morning, though she could still see the ghost of the words in the wood grain. A group of men, led by Henderson's nephew, made a habit of loitering outside and making crude comments whenever Clara entered or left. Jake ran them off more than once, and after the third confrontation nearly came to blows, the sheriff, a grizzled old lawman named Tucker, finally told the men to move along permanently or face arrest for disturbing the peace. Through it all, Clara and Jake grew closer. They shared meals in the back room during the midday break, talking about everything and nothing. Clara learned that Jake had grown up on a small ranch in Texas, the youngest of 4 boys. His father had died when Jake was 16, and his mother had passed 2 years later, leaving the ranch to his oldest brother. Jake had struck out on his own, working cattle drives and saving every penny, dreaming of the day when he would have his own place. Clara shared her own story, though it was harder to tell. Her parents had been freed slaves who had made their way west after the war, dreaming of a better life. They had homesteaded a piece of land outside Silver Ridge, breaking their backs to make it productive. Her father had died of fever when Clara was 14, and her mother had held on for 3 more years before joining him. Clara had been alone ever since, running the homestead by herself and facing the constant challenge of being a black woman in a territory that barely acknowledged her humanity. "You're the strongest person I've ever met," Jake said one evening as they were closing up the store. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the heat of the day was finally beginning to ease. Clara looked up from the ledger she was balancing, startled by the intensity in his voice. "I'm not strong, I'm just doing what I have to do to survive." "That's exactly what makes you strong," Jake insisted. He moved closer, leaning against the counter beside her. "You could have given up 100 times, you could have left Arizona, gone somewhere else, tried to find an easier path. But you stayed. You held onto your family's land. You walked into this store that first day knowing you'd probably be turned away, but you did it anyway because you needed supplies. And now you're here every day, facing down people's hatred and ignorance with grace and dignity. If that's not strength, I don't know what is." Clara felt her eyes burn with unexpected tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "No one has ever said anything like that to me before." Jake reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and gently touched her hand where it rested on the counter. His palm was warm and calloused from years of hard work, and the contact sent a jolt of electricity up Clara's arm. "I mean every word." They stood there for a long moment, hands touching, the air between them charged with something neither of them had quite acknowledged yet. Then the door banged open, and they sprang apart as young Tommy Fletcher burst in, breathless and wide-eyed. "Miss Clara, Mr. Sullivan. There's a fight breaking out at the saloon, and my pa said to tell you that you might want to close up early tonight. Things are getting ugly." Jake's expression darkened. "Thanks for the warning, Tommy. Here, take this for your trouble." He flipped the boy a coin, and Tommy grinned before racing back out into the street. "I'll get my things," Clara said, her heart still pounding from both Jake's touch and the news of potential trouble. "I'll walk you to your horse," Jake said firmly. "And I want you to head straight home and stay there until morning. If things are heating up in town, I don't want you anywhere near it." They closed the store quickly, and Jake walked Clara out to where her horse was tied. The street was unusually quiet, but they could hear shouting coming from the direction of the saloon, 2 streets over. Jake helped Clara mount, his hand steadying her even though she was a perfectly capable rider, and she looked down at him with concern. "What about you? Will you be safe?" "I'll be fine. I'm going to check in with Sheriff Tucker and make sure the store is secure, and then I'll head to my room at the boarding house. Don't worry about me, Clara. Just get home safe." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to stay and make sure he was all right, but she knew he was right. If there was trouble brewing, she would be a target simply for existing. "Be careful," she said softly. "Always am. Now go before it gets dark." Clara rode out of town as the sun dipped below the horizon, but her mind stayed behind with Jake Sullivan. Over the past month, she had tried not to think too much about the way her heart sped up when he smiled at her, or the way she found herself watching him when he was not looking, admiring the way he moved, the strength in his shoulders, the kindness in his eyes. She had told herself it was gratitude, nothing more. He had given her a job and treated her with respect, and she was confusing appreciation with something deeper. But tonight, when he had touched her hand and looked at her with such warmth, she could no longer deny the truth. She was falling in love with Jake Sullivan. The realization terrified her. Loving a white man in Arizona territory was more than just complicated, it was dangerous. There were laws against interracial marriage in many places, and even where it was technically legal, society had its own brutal ways of enforcing its disapproval. She had heard stories of couples run out of town, of men lynched and women attacked, all because they dared to love across the color line. But as Clara lay in her bed that night, staring at the rough wooden beams of her ceiling, she could not stop thinking about the way Jake had looked at her, the way his touch had felt like coming home. The next morning, Clara arrived at the store to find Jake already there, looking tired but unharmed. Relief flooded through her, and she had to resist the urge to throw her arms around him. "Everything all right?" she asked instead, keeping her voice professionally concerned. "Just a bunch of drunk cowboys blowing off steam," Jake said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Sheriff Tucker handled it, but Clara, there's something I need to tell you." Her stomach dropped. "What is it?" "Some of the men involved in the fight last night were talking about the store, about us." Jake's jaw tightened. "They don't like that I hired you. They were saying things, making threats. Tucker broke it up and threw a couple of them in jail for the night, but I wanted you to know." Clara had expected this, but hearing it still hurt. "Maybe I should quit." "I don't want to bring trouble to you." "Absolutely not." Jake's response was immediate and firm. "I told you, I don't give up easy, and I'm not letting a bunch of bigots dictate how I run my business or who I choose to have in my life." He paused, and something in his expression shifted, became more vulnerable. "Clara, you've become important to me, more important than I think you realize. I'm not letting you go, not because of threats from men who don't have the sense God gave a mule." Clara's breath caught. "Jake, what are you saying?" He crossed the store to stand in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look into his eyes. "I'm saying that somewhere between buying this store and working beside you every day, I started to care about you, more than just as my manager. More than just as my friend. I know it's complicated, and I know I might be stepping over a line here, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel what I feel." "I care about you too," Clara admitted, her voice shaking. "But Jake, you know how people will react. It's not just complicated, it could be dangerous for both of us." "I know." Jake reached up slowly and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with heartbreaking gentleness. "But I've been thinking about this a lot, and here's what I've decided. I'd rather face danger with you than live safely without you. If you feel even a fraction of what I feel, then we owe it to ourselves to see where this could go." Clara closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. Every logical part of her brain was screaming at her to step back, to protect herself, to not risk everything for a love that society would condemn. But her heart, her stubborn, hopeful heart, was telling her something different. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I," Jake admitted. "But I'm more scared of losing you before I ever really have you." Clara opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked at him, seeing not just the handsome cowboy who had bought a store on a whim, but the good, decent, courageous man beneath. A man who had shown her more respect and kindness in a few weeks than most people had shown her in a lifetime. A man who was willing to risk everything for her. "All right," she said softly. "Let's see where this goes." Jake's smile was like the sun coming up over the desert, bright and warm and full of promise. He leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and absolutely perfect. Clara's eyes fluttered closed, and she kissed him back, pouring all her fear and hope and love into that single moment of connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing a little harder, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "We'll figure this out," he promised. "Together." "Together," Clara agreed, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe in a happy future. The next few months were a delicate balancing act. In public, Jake and Clara maintained a professional relationship, though anyone paying close attention could see the warmth in their glances and the way they moved around each other with easy familiarity. In private, stolen moments in the back room of the store or during evening walks on the outskirts of town when the sun was setting and the world felt like it belonged to just the two of them, they let their guard down. Jake courted Clara properly, with all the old-fashioned gestures his mother had taught him. He brought her wildflowers that he picked on his rides out to check on potential suppliers. He carried her heavy supply bags without being asked. He listened to her stories and her dreams with complete attention, making her feel heard and valued in a way she had never experienced before. Clara, in turn, showed Jake the tender, softer side of herself that she usually kept hidden behind walls of self-protection. She laughed more freely, smiled more often, and let herself lean on his strength when the weight of prejudice grew too heavy to bear alone. The store was thriving, much to everyone's surprise. Clara's organizational skills and Jake's business sense made them a formidable team. They had expanded the inventory, added a section for farm equipment, and even started carrying a few luxury items like imported tea and fine tobacco. Word spread to the surrounding ranches and homesteads that Sullivan's General Store, as it was now called, had the best selection and fairest prices in the territory. Not everyone was pleased by their success. Henderson's nephew, a mean-spirited man named Curtis, made no secret of his resentment. He spread rumors, tried to undercut their prices at the new store he had opened on the other side of town, and generally made himself a nuisance. But his store was poorly run, his inventory was limited, and customers quickly learned that Sullivan's was the better choice. As autumn began to paint the desert in golds and browns, Jake approached Clara with a serious expression one evening as they were closing up. "I need to ask you something important." Clara set down the broom she had been using and gave him her full attention. "What is it?" "My homestead claim, the one I filed for when I first got to the territory, is about 5 miles outside town. I've been working on building a house there whenever I have time. It's not much yet, just a few rooms, but it's solid and it's mine." He paused, took a breath. "I want you to come see it. I want you to help me decide how to finish it because I'm hoping that someday, if you're willing, it will be yours too." "Ours." Clara's heart began to pound. "Jake, are you asking what I think you're asking?" "Not yet," Jake said quickly. "I know we need to take this slow, and I know there are 1,000 obstacles we still need to figure out. But I'm telling you my intentions, Clara. I'm in love with you, completely and irrevocably, and I'm building a future that I hope will include you. I just wanted you to know that." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks, and she did not bother to wipe them away. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. "I've been trying not to, trying to protect myself, but I can't help it. I love you, Jake Sullivan." Jake closed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. Clara could hear his heart beating strong and steady beneath her ear, and she wrapped her arms around his waist, letting herself believe, just for this moment, that love could conquer all. They went to see the homestead the following Sunday, Clara's only full day off. Jake had borrowed a wagon, and they rode out together in the cool morning air, talking and laughing like they did not have a care in the world. The homestead was beautiful, situated near a small creek with cottonwood trees providing shade. The house was exactly as Jake had described it, simple but solid, with 2 rooms completed and the frame for 2 more in progress. "I was thinking the main bedroom here, facing east to catch the sunrise," Jake said, walking Clara through the space. "And maybe a larger kitchen since the one in the store is so cramped. What do you think?" Clara moved through the rooms, touching the smooth wood of the door frames, imagining curtains on the windows and rugs on the floors. "It's perfect," she said honestly. "I wouldn't change a thing." They spent the day at the homestead, Jake showing Clara his plans for a barn and a chicken coop, Clara pointing out where a vegetable garden could go. They ate the lunch Clara had packed and sat by the creek, watching the water flow past and talking about their dreams. "I want children someday," Clara said softly, throwing pebbles into the water. "I know that makes everything even more complicated, but I always dreamed of having a family." "I want that too," Jake said, taking her hand. "And yes, it will be complicated, and yes, our children will face challenges because of who we are. But they'll also be loved fiercely and completely, and we'll raise them to be strong and kind and proud of both sides of their heritage." Clara turned to look at him, this man who had changed her entire life, and knew with absolute certainty that she wanted to spend the rest of her days with him. "When you're ready to ask that question for real, the answer is going to be yes," Jake's eyes widened, then crinkled with joy. Is that so? That's so, Clara confirmed, and then she kissed him, long and deep, sealing the promise they were making to each other. But the world had a way of intruding on even the most perfect moments. When they returned to town that evening, Sheriff Tucker was waiting for them outside the store, his expression grave. "Jake, Clara, I need to talk to you both," he said without preamble. They climbed down from the wagon, and Clara felt Jake's hand find hers, his grip protective. "What's wrong, Sheriff?" "There's been talk. More than talk, really. Curtis Henderson and a group of his friends have been stirring up trouble, saying that your relationship is indecent and illegal and that something needs to be done about it." Tucker shifted uncomfortably. "Now, personally, I don't give a damn who you love or what color they are, but I took an oath to uphold the law, and I wanted to warn you that Curtis might try to cause real trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Clara asked, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. "The kind that involves fire or violence or running you out of town," Tucker said bluntly. "I'll do everything I can to protect you both, but I'm just one man and I can't be everywhere at once. You need to be careful, watch your backs." Jake's jaw tightened. "Thank you for the warning, Sheriff." "We'll be vigilant." After Tucker left, Jake turned to Clara. "I think you should stay at the homestead for a while. You'll be safer there, away from town." "Absolutely not," Clara said firmly. "If we're in danger, we face it together. I'm not going to hide while you deal with Curtis and his thugs alone." "Clara, please." "No, Jake, we're partners, equals. You don't get to make this decision for me." Clara softened her tone, reaching up to touch his face. "I appreciate that you want to protect me, and I love you for it. But I'm not leaving you. We stand together or not at all." Jake pulled her close, his arms wrapped around her like he could shield her from the entire world. "You're going to make me crazy, woman." "Probably," Clara agreed, her voice muffled against his chest. "But you love me anyway." "I do," Jake said fervently. "God help me, I really do." They took precautions. Jake moved out of his boarding house room and into the small apartment above the store so he could be there to protect Clara and the business. They started varying their routines, never leaving or arriving at the same time each day. Sheriff Tucker increased his patrols around the store, and a few of Jake's friends from his cattle-driving days, rough men who knew how to handle trouble, started dropping by regularly to check on them. For a few weeks, nothing happened and they began to relax. Then, on a cold night in late October, Clara woke to the smell of smoke. She bolted upright in her bed at the homestead, her heart racing. For a moment, she thought she had dreamed it, but then she smelled it again, acrid and sharp. She threw on her robe and ran to the window, and her blood turned to ice. In the distance, back toward town, she could see an orange glow against the night sky. The store. Clara did not waste time. She threw on her clothes, saddled her horse in record time, and rode toward Silver Ridge at a gallop that was reckless in the darkness but necessary. As she got closer, she could see that she had been right. Flames were shooting up from Sullivan's general store and a crowd had gathered, forming a bucket brigade from the town well. Clara pushed through the crowd, screaming Jake's name, terror making her voice raw. She saw Sheriff Tucker and grabbed his arm. "Where's Jake? Is he inside?" "He got out, but he went back in for the ledgers," Tucker said grimly. "I tried to stop him, but you know how he is." Clara did not think. She just moved, running toward the burning building despite Tucker's shout of protest. The heat hit her like a physical wall and smoke burned her lungs, but she pushed forward, pulling her bandana up over her nose and mouth. "Jake," she screamed. "Jake, where are you?" She heard coughing from the back of the store and fought her way through the smoke and flames. Jake was there, collapsed on the floor, the ledgers clutched in his arms. Clara grabbed him under the arms and pulled with strength born of desperation, dragging him toward the door. Someone else appeared beside her, one of Jake's cowboy friends, and together they got Jake outside and away from the burning building. Jake was coughing violently, his face blackened with soot, but he was alive. Clara knelt beside him, tears streaming down her face, checking him for injuries. "You stupid, stupid man," she sobbed. "You could have died." Had to save the books, Jake rasped. Everything we built, all the records, I couldn't let it all burn. The store could not be saved. By the time the bucket brigade got the fire under control, it was nothing but a charred shell. Everything they had worked for, all their inventory and hard work, was gone. Clara sat on the ground with Jake's head in her lap, watching their dream burn to ashes, and felt numb. Sheriff Tucker approached them as dawn was breaking, his face set in hard lines. We found evidence of arson. Someone deliberately set that fire, and we found this. He held up a piece of cloth. It's from Curtis Henderson's shirt, same pattern he was wearing yesterday. I've got witnesses who saw him near the store around midnight, and I'm heading over to arrest him now. Jake struggled to sit up, and Clara helped support him. Do what you need to do, Sheriff, but I don't want any mob justice. We do this by the law. Tucker nodded approvingly. That's the right attitude. I'll keep you posted. As the sheriff walked away, Clara and Jake sat together in the dirt, exhausted and devastated but alive. Around them, townspeople were beginning to disperse, some looking sympathetic, others looking like they thought Jake and Clara had gotten what they deserved. But then Mrs. Chen approached, her face determined. Mr. Sullivan, Miss Clara, this is wrong. What happened here is wrong. I want you to know that there are people in this town who see that. She pressed a cloth bundle into Clara's hands. It's not much, just some food and a blanket, but I wanted you to have it. After Mrs. Chen, others came forward. The Reverend Blackwell offered the use of a church building for temporary shelter and business. The owner of the dry goods warehouse, a taciturn German immigrant named Mr. Schulz, offered to extend them credit for new inventory. Even some people who had been coldly indifferent before seemed moved by the violence of the fire, offering words of support or small donations. I think, Jake said hoarsely, watching this unexpected outpouring of support, that Curtis Henderson just made the biggest mistake of his life. He thought he could drive us out by destroying the store, but all he did was show people what kind of man he is, and what kind of people we are. Clara looked at the ruins of their store, then at the small but growing group of supporters around them, and felt something shift. What do we do now? Jake took her hand, his grip strong despite his exhaustion. We rebuild, together, if you're still willing. Clara thought about running, about giving up, about taking the easy path. Then she looked at Jake, this man who had risked his life to save their business records, who had stood by her against prejudice and hatred, who loved her with a fierceness that took her breath away. I'm still willing, she said, always. The next few months were the hardest of Clara's life. Curtis Henderson was arrested and charged with arson, and his trial became the talk of the territory. Jake and Clara had to testify, facing down not only Curtis, but the ugly prejudice of some of the townspeople who thought they had brought this on themselves by daring to cross racial lines. But the evidence was overwhelming, and Curtis was convicted and sentenced to 5 years in the territorial prison. The verdict sent a clear message. Vigilante justice and race-based violence would not be tolerated, at least not in Silver Ridge. With the insurance money from the fire and loans from several supportive townspeople, Jake and Clara began rebuilding the store. This time, they built it better, with a larger layout, better ventilation, and a fireproof safe for the important documents. Clara designed the interior, creating an efficient and welcoming space. Jake handled the construction, working alongside hired carpenters and friends who volunteered their labor. The new Sullivan's General Store opened in March of 1883, almost exactly 1 year after Clara had first walked into Henderson's store and been turned away. The grand opening was attended by half the town, including many of the same people who had been so hostile before. Some came out of curiosity, some out of genuine support, and some because they needed supplies and Sullivan's was the best store around. Clara did not much care about their motivations. What mattered was that they were there, and they were treating her with respect. That evening, after the last customer had left and they had locked the door on their successful first day, Jake took Clara's hand and led her to the back room. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his pocket. Clara's breath caught as he pulled out a small velvet box. "Jake, I know we've been through hell this past year," Jake said, dropping to one knee. "And I know that choosing to be with me means choosing a life that will be harder than it should be. But Clara Bennett, you are the strongest, bravest, most incredible woman I have ever met, and I want to spend the rest of my life by your side. Will you marry me?" Clara did not hesitate. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Jake slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple gold band with a small but beautiful diamond that caught the lamplight, and then he stood and kissed her with all the pent-up emotion of the past year. When they finally broke apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. "When?" Clara asked breathlessly. "As soon as you want," Jake replied. "Tomorrow, if you'll have me," Clara laughed. "Let's give it at least a few weeks. I want to do this properly." They were married on a Sunday in late April, with Reverend Blackwell officiating and a small group of friends and supporters in attendance. Clara wore a dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her make, a beautiful cream-colored silk with delicate embroidery. Jake wore his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed, looking more nervous than Clara had ever seen him. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When Reverend Blackwell pronounced them husband and wife, and Jake kissed his bride for the first time as her legal husband, there was not a dry eye in the church. It was not the largest wedding Silver Ridge had ever seen, but it was one of the most meaningful, a public declaration that love could transcend the artificial boundaries society tried to impose. The reception was held at the store, which they had decorated with wildflowers and ribbons. There was music and dancing and more food than their small group could possibly eat. Sheriff Tucker gave a toast about courage and integrity. Mrs. Chen cried happy tears and pressed a hand-stitched quilt into Clara's hands. Even Mr. Schulz cracked a rare smile and wished them well in his heavily accented English. As the sun set and their guests began to depart, Jake and Clara stood in the doorway of their store, arms around each other, watching the desert sky turn purple and gold. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Sullivan?" Jake asked softly. Clara looked up at him, this man who had changed her life in ways she never could have imagined, and smiled. "I'm ready." They rode out to the homestead together, the house that Jake had finished over the winter now complete and waiting for them. He carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing at the traditional gesture, and set her down gently in the middle of their bedroom. The room was lit by a dozen candles, casting a warm glow over the simple furniture and the beautiful quilt that covered their bed. Jake had clearly prepared for this moment, and Clara felt her heart swell with love for this thoughtful, caring man. "I want you to know something," Jake said, taking both her hands in his. "I will spend every day of the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you. I will protect you, provide for you, and love you with everything I have. You have my word on that, and you have mine," Clara replied, reaching up to cup his face. "I will stand by your side through whatever comes. I will build a life with you, a family with you, a future with you. I love you, Jake Sullivan, with all my heart." They came together then, husband and wife, sealing their vows in the most intimate way possible. Clara had been nervous, not knowing quite what to expect, but Jake was gentle and patient, making sure she felt cherished and safe. They learned each other slowly, tenderly, and when they finally joined together completely, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, like two pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the candlelight, Jake tracing lazy patterns on Clara's shoulder, Clara listening to the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Jake asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "For seeing me, for choosing me. For loving me when the world said you shouldn't." "Clara, you have it backwards," Jake said softly. "Thank you for giving me a chance. Thank you for being brave enough to love me back. You've made me happier than I ever thought I could be." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and Clara dreamed of a future full of promise. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were still people in Silver Ridge and beyond who disapproved of their marriage, who made snide comments or refused to do business with them. There were legal complications when they tried to file joint property claims, bureaucrats who made things difficult simply because they could. There were moments of fear when threats were made or hostility flared up, reminding them that the fight for acceptance was ongoing. But there were also joys beyond measure. The store continued to thrive, becoming a cornerstone of the community. Jake and Clara earned respect through their hard work, their fair dealing, and their unwavering integrity. They hired several employees as the business grew, including 2 young black women from a nearby settlement who were grateful for the opportunity. In the spring of 1884, Clara discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with excitement and trepidation. They knew their child would face unique challenges, but they were determined to raise their baby in a home filled with love and acceptance. Their son was born on a snowy evening in January of 1885, coming into the world with a lusty cry that made both his parents weep with joy. They named him Samuel, after Jake's father, and from the moment Clara held him in her arms, she knew that every struggle, every hardship, every moment of fear had been worth it to bring this perfect little person into existence. Samuel had his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark curls, a beautiful blend of both his heritages. As he grew, he proved to be a bright, curious child, adored by both his parents and doted on by the growing circle of people who had come to accept and respect the Sullivan family. When Samuel was 2, Clara became pregnant again, and this time they welcomed a daughter. They named her Rose after Clara's mother, and she was a tiny, fierce thing who had her father wrapped around her little finger from day one. Rose had Clara's warm brown skin and Jake's stubborn chin, and she would grow up to be as strong-willed as both her parents combined. The store expanded again, and Jake and Clara hired a manager to help run the day-to-day operations so they could spend more time with their children. They bought more land, adding to their homestead, and Jake built a larger house with room for their growing family and any future additions. In 1888, Clara gave birth to twins, 2 boys they named Henry and James, and their family felt complete. The house was always full of noise and laughter, the sound of children playing, the smell of Clara's cooking, the warmth of Jake's presence as he came in from working the land or the store. Sheriff Tucker retired, and the new sheriff was a younger man who had grown up seeing the Sullivans as a normal part of the community. Reverend Blackwell's progressive teachings had taken root in a new generation, and slowly but surely, attitudes in Silver Ridge began to shift. It was not perfect, and there were still holdouts who clung to their prejudices, but the general atmosphere was one of growing acceptance. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jake and Clara stood on the porch of their home, watching their 4 children play in the yard. Samuel was teaching Rose how to ride the new pony Jake had bought, while the twins tumbled in the grass with the family dog. "Can you believe it's been 10 years?" Clara asked, leaning against Jake's side. "Best 10 years of my life," Jake said, wrapping his arm around her waist. "Though I have to admit, sometimes I still can't believe you said yes to a dusty cowboy like me." Clara laughed, the sound rich and full of happiness. "You're not just any dusty cowboy, you're my dusty cowboy, the man who bought a store to defend my dignity. The man who built me a home with his own hands, the man who gave me a family and a life beyond anything I dared to dream." "You did the same for me," Jake said seriously, turning to look at her. "Before you, I was just drifting. I had money and plans, but no real purpose. You gave me something to fight for, someone to build a life with. You made me better, Clara." "We made each other better," Clara corrected gently. "That's what love does." Jake pulled her close and kissed her, a sweet, lingering kiss that still made Clara's heart flutter even after 10 years of marriage. When they broke apart, Rose was making exaggerated gagging noises, and Samuel was grinning, while the twins were oblivious, still wrestling with the dog. "Papa, that's disgusting," Rose declared, though she was smiling. "Your mama and I are allowed to kiss," Jake informed his daughter solemnly. "It's one of the benefits of being married." "I'm never getting married," Rose announced with the absolute certainty of a 6-year-old. "That's what your mama said once," Jake teased, and Clara swatted his arm. As the sun began to set over the desert, painting everything in shades of gold and rose, the Sullivan family gathered on the porch for dinner. It was a simple meal, beans and cornbread and fresh vegetables from Clara's garden, but it was shared with laughter and love. After the children were in bed, Clara and Jake sat together on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I've been thinking," Clara said softly. "About what?" "About everything we've been through, all the hardship and the struggle. Sometimes I wonder what our lives would have been like if that first day had gone differently. If Henderson had just sold me the supplies I needed, if you hadn't been standing outside, if you hadn't decided to do something crazy like buy the store." Jake considered this. "We probably never would have met. I would have eventually settled down somewhere, maybe married some nice girl who didn't challenge me or make me think too hard about the world. You would have kept struggling on your homestead, alone and isolated. We both would have had smaller, sadder lives." "Exactly," Clara said. "So as hard as it was, as painful as some of those moments were, I wouldn't change a thing. Because it brought us here to this moment, to this life we've built together." "No regrets?" Jake asked. "Not a single one," Clara confirmed. "You?" "Only that I didn't buy that store sooner," Jake said with a grin. "I could have met you months earlier." Clara laughed and snuggled closer to him, breathing in his familiar scent, feeling the solid warmth of his body against hers. "I love you, Jake Sullivan." "I love you too, Clara Sullivan. Today, tomorrow, and forever." They sat there until the moon rose high and bright, casting silver light across the desert landscape. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully, safe and loved. The store in town would open tomorrow, serving customers of all backgrounds without prejudice. The land around them was productive and beautiful, a testament to hard work and determination. It was not the life Clara had imagined for herself when she was a lonely, struggling homesteader facing daily discrimination. It was not the life Jake had planned when he was a wandering cowboy with more money than purpose. But it was their life, built together through courage and love and an unwavering commitment to each other. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Samuel grew into a thoughtful young man who took over much of the ranch operations, showing a natural talent for managing both land and livestock. Rose became a fierce advocate for justice, often standing up to anyone who dared to make discriminatory comments. Her parents' daughter through and through. Henry developed a head for numbers and helped modernize the store's accounting systems, while James discovered a love for carpentry and started his own furniture-making business. Clara and Jake grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces gaining the lines and weathering of a life well lived. But their love never faded. If anything, it deepened, becoming the kind of profound partnership that only comes from weathering storms together and coming out stronger on the other side. On their 25th anniversary, the town of Silver Ridge threw them a celebration. What had started as a small, controversial interracial marriage had become a symbol of progress and hope in the community. People who had once turned their backs now came forward to share how the Sullivans had changed their perspectives, opened their minds, and shown them a better way. Curtis Henderson's store had long since closed, and the man himself had left the territory after serving his sentence, disgraced and unwelcome. Meanwhile, Sullivan's General Store had become an institution, known throughout the Arizona territory for its fair dealing and quality goods. "Who would have thought?" Jake said to Clara that night as they slow danced under the stars, the celebration winding down around them, that buying a store on impulse would lead to all of this. "It was never about the store," Clara said, looking up at him with eyes that still held all the love and wonder of their first days together. "It was about seeing injustice and deciding to do something about it. It was about choosing love over fear. It was about being brave enough to believe that we could build something beautiful together even when the world told us we couldn't. "You make me sound like a hero," Jake said with a self-deprecating smile. "You are my hero," Clara said simply. "You always have been." "From that very first day when you stepped up and chose to stand with me instead of walking past like everyone else would have. You changed my life, Jake Sullivan." "And you changed mine," Jake replied, pulling her closer. "Every single day with you has been a gift, Clara, even the hard days. Especially the hard days, because they proved that what we have is strong enough to withstand anything." They danced until the moon was high overhead, and their children, now grown with families beginning to form of their own, came to walk them home. The Sullivan legacy was not just a successful business or a thriving homestead. It was a testament to the power of love to overcome hatred, the power of courage to defeat fear, and the power of two people committed to building a life together against all odds. As Clara and Jake settled into their bed that night, surrounded by the memories of 25 years together, Clara thought back to that scared, angry young woman who had walked into a store only to be turned away. She thought about all the pain and struggle that had followed, but also all the incredible joy and love. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Jake asked sleepily, pulling her close. "For choosing me, for loving me, for giving me a life beyond my wildest dreams." Jake pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Right back at you, Mrs. Sullivan, right back at you." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, just as they had on their wedding night all those years ago, and just as they would continue to do for all the years to come. Outside, the desert wind whispered through the cottonwood trees, and the stars shone bright over the land that had witnessed their love story unfold. The Sullivan family continued to grow and prosper. Grandchildren arrived, bringing new life and laughter to the homestead. Samuel married a teacher from back east who had come to Silver Ridge to open a school for children of all backgrounds. Rose shocked everyone by falling in love with and marrying a Navajo rancher, creating another bridge between communities. The twins both found love in their own time, Henry with the daughter of Mr. Schulz, and James with a widow who had moved to town with her young son. Clara and Jake became the beloved matriarch and patriarch of not just their family but the entire community. Young couples would come to them for advice, businesses would seek their counsel, and anyone facing discrimination would find advocates and allies in the Sullivans. As they moved into their 60s and then their 70s, Clara and Jake slowed down physically but remained as sharp and engaged as ever. They handed over the day-to-day operations of the store to Henry and his wife, but they still came by regularly to visit with customers and offer guidance. One evening in the spring of 1908, 26 years after their first meeting, Clara and Jake sat on the porch of their home, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and a few great-grandchildren who were just beginning to arrive. A photographer from the territorial newspaper had come to do a story on the Sullivan family, documenting the remarkable journey from that first day of injustice to the thriving legacy they had built. "Mr. Sullivan, Mrs. Sullivan, what would you say is the secret to your long and happy marriage?" The young journalist asked, his pencil poised over his notebook. Jake and Clara looked at each other, communicating in that wordless way that long-married couples develop. Then Clara spoke, her voice still strong despite her years. "The secret is simple, really. You choose each other every single day. You choose love over anger, understanding over judgment, forgiveness over resentment. You build each other up instead of tearing each other down. You face the world as a team, united against whatever comes. And you never let anyone else tell you who you can love or how you should live," Jake added, taking Clara's hand. "We've faced hatred and discrimination, violence and threats, but we've never wavered in our commitment to each other and to the family we've built. That's what has carried us through." The journalist scribbled furiously, then looked up with genuine admiration. "Your story is truly remarkable. Do you have any advice for young couples today, especially those who might be facing opposition to their relationships?" Clara thought for a moment, looking at her children and grandchildren gathered around the beautiful tapestry of their blended family. I would tell them to be brave. The path of love is not always easy, especially when you're breaking down barriers and challenging prejudice. But it is always worth it. The love that Jake and I share, the family we've created, the community we've helped build, none of that would exist if we had let fear win. So be brave, hold tight to each other, and never give up on love. Jake squeezed her hand. And I would add this. Find someone who sees you, truly sees you for who you are. Not your skin color, not your background, not what society says you should be, but your actual heart and soul. That's what Clara and I found in each other, and it has made all the difference. The journalist thanked them and left to write his story, which would run in newspapers across the territory and eventually the new state of Arizona, inspiring countless readers with the tale of the cowboy who bought a store to defend a woman's dignity and ended up finding the love of his life. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, the Sullivan family gathered for dinner. The table had been extended multiple times over the years to accommodate everyone, and it groaned under the weight of Clara's cooking, supplemented by dishes brought by the various family members. Samuel raised his glass for a toast. To Mama and Papa, who taught us that love conquers all, that courage matters, and that family is the greatest blessing life can offer. Everything we have, everything we are, is because of the foundation you built. To Mama and Papa. The family chorused, and Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy and gratitude. That night, as Clara and Jake prepared for bed, moving with the careful slowness of advanced age, Clara paused to look at herself in the mirror. Her hair was completely white now, her face deeply lined, her hands gnarled with arthritis. But when Jake came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, meeting her eyes in the mirror, she saw something else. A woman who was deeply loved, who had lived a full and meaningful life, who had no regrets. Still beautiful, Jake murmured, kissing her temple. You need spectacles, Clara teased, but she leaned back against him, savoring his embrace. I see you perfectly, Jake insisted. I see the girl who walked into that store with her head held high despite knowing she'd probably be turned away. I see the woman who took a chance on a crazy cowboy with more idealism than sense. I see the mother who raised our children to be strong and compassionate. I see the grandmother who adores her grandchildren. I see my partner, my love, my life. Clara turned in his arms and kissed him, a sweet, gentle kiss that still held all the passion of their younger days, just tempered now with decades of devotion. I love you, Jake Sullivan. Thank you for the most wonderful life. I love you too, Clara Sullivan. Thank you for saying yes all those years ago. They climbed into bed, Jake helping Clara settle comfortably, and they lay facing each other in the lamplight, hands clasped between them. Do you think we've done enough? Clara asked softly. Do you think we've made enough of a difference? Jake smiled, thinking of their children and grandchildren, of the store that still served all people equally, of the community that had slowly transformed from one of prejudice to one of greater acceptance. I think we've done more than enough. We've lived our lives with integrity and love. We've raised a family that will carry on our values. We've shown people that love transcends artificial boundaries. That's a pretty remarkable legacy, Clara. It is, isn't it? Clara agreed, her eyes growing heavy. I'm so grateful, Jake, for all of it. Even the hard parts, because they led us here. Me too, my love, me too. They fell asleep holding hands, and that night, Clara dreamed of that first day, of walking into Henderson's store and being turned away, of Jake standing outside with righteousness blazing in his eyes, of the moment he offered her a job and changed her life forever. But in the dream, she could see the whole arc of their story, from that painful beginning to this beautiful ending, and she understood that every moment, every challenge, every triumph had been necessary to create the tapestry of their shared life. Clara and Jake lived several more years, growing older but never losing their essential connection. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by 4 generations of family, a testament to the love that had started with a simple act of courage in the face of injustice. When Jake passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Clara mourned deeply, but not bitterly. She knew that they had been blessed with more years together than many couples ever received, and that their love would continue through their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Clara lived another 3 years, surrounded by family, still sharp-minded and fierce-hearted until the end. On her last day, with her children gathered around her bed, she smiled and whispered, "Tell your father I'm on my way. I've missed him terribly." Her daughter Rose held her hand and said, "He's waiting for you, Mama. He's been waiting." Clara closed her eyes and with her last breath said, "My Jake." The Sullivan children buried their mother next to their father in the small cemetery outside Silver Ridge, under a cottonwood tree that Jake had planted years before. The entire town turned out for the funeral, a final testament to the impact Clara and Jake had made on their community. On the shared headstone, the family inscribed these words, "Clara and Jake Sullivan. They chose love over fear, courage over complacency, and built a legacy that will endure for generations, together forever." And in the years that followed, when people told the story of Silver Ridge and how it transformed from a prejudiced frontier town to a community that embraced all people, they always came back to the same beginning. The day a young black woman was refused service at the general store, and a cowboy decided to buy that store and hire her, not knowing that in doing so, he was beginning a love story that would inspire generations to come. The Sullivan General Store stood for another 50 years, run by Henry's children and then their children, always maintaining the values that Clara and Jake had established. Treat everyone with respect, judge people by their character, and believe in the power of love to change the world. The homestead became a historical landmark, preserved by the family and eventually donated to the state as a museum showcasing the remarkable story of the Sullivans and the broader history of interracial families in the Old West. But more than any building or business, the true legacy of Clara and Jake Sullivan lived on in the hearts and lives of their descendants. They had proved that love could overcome hatred, that courage could defeat prejudice, and that 2 people committed to each other could build something beautiful and lasting even in the face of tremendous opposition. Their story became legend, passed down through generations, inspiring anyone who heard it to be a little braver, a little more loving, a little more willing to stand up for what is right. And whenever someone asked, did they really live happily ever after? The answer was always the same. Yes, they really did. Against all odds, despite every obstacle, Clara and Jake Sullivan found true love and built a life together that was filled with joy, purpose, and an enduring legacy of hope. Their journey had started with an act of injustice and a single moment of courageous defiance, and it had ended with a family legacy that would endure for generations, proving once and for all that love truly does conquer all.